Oh, if you need earbuds, I have them. All right, so let's get started. 869 to 891. I was trying to write. Yeah. Let me rewrite that. Yeah, but that would lose the effect, wouldn't it? We didn't quite get to 18. For Thursday. Didn't quite get to 1873. So what do you call it when companies get together and try to set a price floor? It's an illegal fraud. Cool. What is it called when the bigger company comes in and dominates the other companies, makes them turn over control of their company to them? What is it called where investment bankers will put their people on the board to control them, to make sure to kind of control the ups and downs of the economy? Who's the banker who did that? And what is called where a corporation owns other corporations? And what state first did that? New Jersey. Oh, what is it called where if you the big advantage for a corporation that the owners of the corporation, the shareholders, they're only they're only out what they invest. The owners of a corporation are only out what they invest. Corporate limited liability. I kept on wanting to say they're only liable. That's too much of a hint for this. And did we get to this? Where did we finish? Oh, 14th Amendment. Yeah, corporations have with the Southern Pacific Railroad case, we get oligopolies. Ooh, so we got here. This is a big deal. So that means corporations, they're not people, yet they have all the rights. Contribute to political campaigns. Oh, I should have. So I know it won't go anywhere because it's really hard to get an amendment to the Constitution. But Senator from Montana, John Tester, is going to be part of a group that are going to try to get an amendment that say corporations are not people. So that literally, they just came out. He is one of the co-sponsors of that. It will not get even. It will not get. He might get a vote in the Senate. Won't get a vote in the House. Most Democrats would be for that. Every Republican would be. So that would go. That kind of gives you that political divide. So Standard Oil, Esso, Exxon. So what we have then are oligopolies. Oligopolies are when you have just a few companies that control a marketplace. And what you have then is a real concentration of wealth and power. It's going to flow to these monopolies. Wherever there's monopolies, money just flows to the top. So money from everybody else. And so a real concentration of wealth and power. These are corporate consolidations exploded at the end of the 1890s after the panic. And then, of course, New Jersey and all the other states changing their laws. We saw the same thing in 2020, 2021. We saw the same thing in 2009. I always got to add, from the 1930s to the late 1970s, monopolies were aggressively controlled. They would break up monopolies. There were no real monopolies for the most part, except they're well-regulated ones. They don't enforce those laws anymore, so that's why we're back to monopolies. But even if you have just a few companies, they might act like they're competitors. You notice like car prices are, for the most part, they're the same. There might be some slight qualitative or a few little differences between automobiles, but they're all basically the same price. Or you look at, you go to Home Depot and look at washers and dryers or refrigerators, and they have different qualitative differences, but they're all basically the same price if you go over to Lowe's. In fact, there's only two hardware stores basically that could do almost all of any of those type of stores in the United States, Lowe's and Home Depot. They have about 90% of the market, those two companies. They basically have the same price. Slight differences, of course. But that's, you could see it happening here. So you want to know how, why is the world the way it is now? You see it happening, starting here, downturn in the 30s, 40s, 50s, not downturn of monopolies. Now we're all monopolies. And so that is we start calling the monopoly the beast. people started, that's why you always have these drawings of these big corporate entities who will suck up marketplaces and control the market, either through an oligopoly or monopoly. And this energetic, never-ending desire to expand, grow, and make money. Because one of the problems that monopolies have, or companies that want to, the desire to get big never goes away. They get to a certain size and they must either grow or they start losing revenue. They never can stop growing in this kind of market. Because if they stop growing, others will catch them. It's a never-ending desire unless there's controls put on. And so this is Standard Oil on some kind of beast. You see monsters, so many monsters. Octopus is going to be the most common because their tentacles are everywhere. From government to workers, controlling everything. Harbors, you name it. Also, if you have monopolies, prices don't necessarily go up, but generally they do. It has to be a monopoly, a product that people want. Prices will go up. If you have a monopoly on water, you can pretty much charge anything you want. And yes, there are starting to become water monopolies around it, taking over the water. And same thing too. Why innovate if you have a monopoly? Do you really need to make anything better? Where else are you going to go? Why provide good service? Where are you going to go? Or for that matter, quality. They're going to go. And so you see that every time there's monopolies. So a good example of oligopolies were because of the size of necessary to make cars, even though they weren't technically monopolies. Even in the 1970s, there was an oligopoly of car companies. There were 3.5 car companies that basically controlled car manufacturing. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, I know this is, and then a smaller company called American Motors that would eventually roll into Chrysler. That's why I said 3.5. And there's no competition. So what did they do? Have you ever seen cars from the 60s and 70s? These big monstrous boats. They broke down all the time. They had bad brakes. They got about 3 gallons to the mile. I'm not exaggerating by much. I remember having a car got about 11 miles to the gallon. These big monstrous things, and they had all kinds of problems because they didn't care. And you saw that happening for quality. Yes, competitors, also oligopolies from Japan would come in and make higher quality cars. I know it disrupt everything. And like there's only one cable company in Montana. And their service is notoriously poor. Now, I'm going to be clear about it. Those who work at Spectrum work very, very hard. There's just not very many of them. So service is low. And you see the same thing in railroads. There's all kinds of track issues on Burlington Road Santa Fe. It's a crisis. Once again, people work their tail off. There's just not very many because they don't need it. Yeah.
For quality like that, allow a smaller business to open up at higher quality but higher price.
But capital is so expensive. For smaller to come in, they would have to invest so much that their cost would be so high. It's really hard to compete because of the companies. So there have been attempts. There were a couple really high profile attempts, like in the car manufacturing custom models. They could do it technically, it's just the cost is so much. And so that's why monopolies have this great advantage. And so with that, but there's another important thing. I should add, before prices, you can raise some prices, but you can't. Let's say you have a monopoly on wooden shoes, right? We all like wooden shoes, but you really can't raise the price. Because people will say, I really don't need those wooden shoes. So some things you can't raise the price to have a monopoly. You have to be kind of careful with it. But let's get back to monopoly. This is one that people discount because we just don't think of it this way. Partially because the word monopoly is one that sounds like I'm making up, doesn't it? But it's a single buyer. There's a monopoly of only one person either buying all the raw materials, buying all the components, one person buying all or hiring all the workers. They have great control of the market, a monopoly. If there's only one company that's hiring in a certain field or an oligopoly, what happens to wages? They go down. They go down dramatically. And in the 1890s, real wages, 1880s and 1890s, wages started going down dramatically in the United States. Now, what I mean by that is real wages. Real wages means it takes inflation into account. So the wages might go up a little bit, but not as much as the prices were going. And back then, the wages were stagnant. So right now, wages are not keeping up with inflation. Now, inflation has dropped dramatically, and it's probably, the big inflation here is probably very close to being over, but wages did not keep up. I have a job where we got a raise last year, but it was not as much of inflation. So in real terms, we actually got a pay cut because it didn't keep up with the way prices were up. So that's real terms. But back to this, wages go down. So there's only one entity hiring. And we really see that in tech jobs. There's only a few companies hiring. And even though the wages might be higher than other wages in certain areas, the wages are really stagnant and are going to start dropping because they're all just hemorrhaging workers. Of course, Google just fired 20,000. They found out when their key card didn't work and they couldn't get any work. That's a good boss. But yeah, they all thought they had a job. Nope. Microsoft laid off 10,000. So you're going to see that in those kind of jobs because there's only one person hiring. Teaching, my job, and who hires teachers? That has a downward pressure on wages, just does. And then suppliers also have to cut costs. And this is the biggie. And I'll give you a really good example of this because this happened. You saw the effects of it in your lifetime. I witnessed it firsthand. I used to hang out outside of stores. But there's a big store that was growing in the 1970s and 80s across the South and soon become nationwide in the 1980s. You might have heard of it, Walmart. And Walmart, by the end of the 1980s, was almost 45% of all clothing sold. In fact, by the 2000s, it was 60%. I know that's not 100%, but with that kind of market share, it's in essence almost like a monopoly. And Walmart started going to clothing manufacturers. And most clothes at that time were made in the South. Remember we talked about textiles being up here? They moved in the South in the 1920s and 1930s because they could get a lot lower wages. They could pay about half as much as. So they were working down here, so Alabama, South Carolina, a lot of textiles, North Carolina. And they went to these clothing manufacturers. Walmart did and said, yeah, I'm not going to pay you what you want. We'll give you 60 cents on the dollar you want. So 60%. That's it. That's what we're going to give. And what can the clothing retailer or what the actual manufacturer of clothes, what can they do? If Walmart's not buying their clothes, that's for some of them, their whole market was selling to Walmart. And now Walmart's not going to buy. What do? Shut down. So what do? Okay. Walmart had that power and they went down to 60%. And then what happened?
Went down again.
And then Walmart kept pushing it down. And so what do these clothing manufacturers have to do? Yeah.
So theoretically, say like manufacturer, they sold the Walmart down, so they could Walmart like theoretically like we're not paying anything. It's going to be us or your only people that are taking.
Not quite, because they want to pay them enough to keep manufacturing, but they were at almost no profit. And so what do these companies do? Anyone know? Yeah. They cut, but still they got to make money. They got to cut costs. How do you cut costs? Outsourcing, it's called. Where do they set up shop? Starting in Mexico, but then Guatemala. Or to a lesser degree, China, but now China, the wages are too high in China, so no, there's many there. Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, where they could pay 1/10 or in Bangladesh, 1/20 the amount they would pay somebody. In Mexico, and Mexico is 1/10 of the US. I would imagine, in fact, don't look right now, it could get awkward, but I could bet that none of you are wearing something that's made in the US. There's a shot, maybe. But no clothes are made in the US. That's what monopolies do. And by the way, what happened to all those jobs here? They did the same thing in steel. This used to make steel. They're all gone. Back in those shops. And so you had whole towns that was just textile. There was just a textile mill was in town. It's gone. What happened to the town? And this is a real issue. That shows you what monopolies, that's the power they have. So, and what do they want then? They want to continue having that power and control in the market. And so you'll see whenever monopolies start, or whenever companies start getting close to a monopoly, they start reaching out for more political control. Why? They want to make sure they can keep their monopoly. Remember, governments make the rules. That means the people who decide the government, and if you have something like a democracy, the people, they're ultimately responsible for the rules. And so they're going to do everything they can to make sure they have political control so the rules that favor them. You see this every time. I mean, direct government or political contributions from businesses exploded in the 1890s. Just exploded. What's happening now? It's out of the world how much money businesses give. Out of the world. So money. And then they get the rules. Yeah. So Teddy Roosevelt kind of did that in 1904, and they destroyed it. They made sure it could not run again in 1904. And Franklin Roosevelt, they called him a traitor to his cause. So it's a big political cost. So it's pretty scary, and most of them won't do it. You know, you can't run for office unless you have a lot of money, the way our system is. So that's a good question. You're going to make a lot of enemies. So there's very few politicians that will want to risk that money. Then through today. And one more thing that's going to happen. Wealth is just going to flow to the top. Because those who have the capital or making the loans to them finance, money will just flow. You have a monopoly, money flows to you. That's why you want a monopoly. There's reasons they want monopolies. And once again, I'll repeat, have you noticed Monopoly, the game, is only made by one company? I should add, originally Monopoly was supposed to show how bad monopolies were. Then it turned into this cutthroat game that always ended in a fist fight. At least that's what the games I played. Yeah, that's actually. So let's get to the last thing then. Who are these new business leaders? They're going to be dubbed robber barons. At first, it was seen as a major insult. Robber barons were ones who had castles like along the Rhine River, and they would stop barges going upriver. And they would say, hey, you want to keep going? Pay our toll. We'll protect you. So thieves. Well, robber barons would use the power of monopoly, government control, economies of scale, and also innovation, intelligence, block, I mean, all kinds of stuff to control. So here are trusts represent monopolies, and you know, they show them very heavy with the idea being they have good diets. And everybody from politicians, the workers, the farmers bowing to their feet with money. Pretty good card. And I love war, tariff, and monopoly. What gives them their power. This was actually the end of 1900. The war was the Spanish-American War. And so these new entrepreneurs, they're the ones who, they might not have known anything about steel. And Cornelius Vanderbilt started as a captain on a ship. But they took the risk, like Carnegie and with the Bessemer process. They just, and it's luck. There's intelligence, a lot of factors, but Carnegie rolled the die at the right time. Vanderbilt rolled the die on railroads with money he earned as a ship's captain and then running a little shipping industry to Nicaragua for the California gold mines. But don't forget, they take the risk, they get the profit. You know, that is the great advantage for capitalists. It's also a great incentive. You know, you get the profit, might be worth the risk, but a lot of risk. But if you get rid of the risk, you just get profit. And so there's Cornelius Vanderbilt. This is Jay Gould and Robert Fisk kind of creepily on little, these were two other robber barons. And this is the New York Central Railroad, just controlling the Northeast corridor is called. This is right before the Pennsylvania came, which was even bigger. And they would therefore accumulate massive amounts of wealth. And this is why they started calling this the Gilded Age. And we'll talk more about the Gilded Age down the road, but this idea of gold gilded wealth. But we'll come back to that. As you can see from the picture getting smaller, and they also got extreme amount of power. The wealth is important, but the power is what's at stake. And the game, how they made it. It's not even the money anymore. They just keep wanting more. And this is something I just noticed while I was painting. My brother sent me this. He found out that, oh, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but there's something really important happening Sunday. So yeah, for reasons that now I can't explain, sometimes I envy people who are not fans of professional football, but I've been a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs for over 50 years. Don't forget, I'm old. And trust me, I've gone through some bad years. If you're not a fan, good for you, but the AFC Championship, so all of you must drop everything and cheer for Kansas City, right? Everyone with me on that? Even if you don't give a damn, act like you do. That's all we care about. Talk about favoring corporations. Moving on. Go corporations. Okay, so do you remember about that? He actually sent me something about that. Yes, Chiefs. The Bengals. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
If you're for the Bengals or the Broncos out there too, you have no sort. Moving on. Who do you like? Same. Okay. Now, no, my brother sent me this actually because talking about the Chiefs game because we would have had it. And but somebody bet there's a playoff game where the Los Angeles Chargers were down 27-0 in the first half. Or I'm sorry, we're up 27-0. And they should probably win. They end up losing. But somebody, just because they have a lot of money, they bet on the Chargers winning. 2 minutes left at halftime. They bet $1.4 million on the Chargers to win. And if the Chargers would have won that game, all they would have won was $11,000. They would have got their money back plus $11,000. That's what I mean by people just get involved with just the winning and getting more. Because really? But I have good news for all of you. Whoever that person was lost $1.4 million. And I'm like, good. Okay, moving on. So with that, and also look at that facial hair. If you're a robber baron, that's Cornelius Vanderbilt. And yes, he would feel guilty about how he did it. That's part of the reason he would build a college. Don't remember me for the 100 workers that died every week on my railroad. Remember me for my college. And so with that, things went dark. But what can happen? How did I do that? Your job. No, actually, I gotta start over again. This is quality. I'm recording this. This is quality entertainment right now. Somebody watching this and goes, wow. We're back. All right. So cool facial hair. So there's Cornelius Vanderbilt. No, he's right, but they call him the Commodore. He had chips, but here he is using the power of 2 railroads to defeat his smaller competitors with Erie Railroad. Now the Erie's gone, but he actually would say this. His point of view was, it's my money, my wealth, my power. I can do whatever I want. Now, arguably, yes. But when you have a railroad, how many people rely upon your railroad for their very livelihood, to get their goods to market, to get information, to ship their products out, to buy goods, to buy food? Once you have railroads, people are committed to them. fact, there's a term for it in modern era, it's called the common carrier. Yeah, power lines, a company might own them, but without power lines, our society falls apart. So they have a big responsibility. And this is going to be an issue. They don't want people to mess with their responsibility towards society. But does society have that role? And where does that start? Where does that end? So let's show oligopolies. So I was going to show oligopolies and I thought, well, let's just show it now. Because you can see it now. You go to a grocery store. Oh, I showed you this yesterday, didn't I? Did I show you this yesterday? Oh, I didn't. So you go to a grocery store. So you go into Albertsons. 90% of the shelf space are taken up by these 10 companies. So you might think, oh, look at all these products. It's amazing. Or for that matter, restaurants, fast food restaurants are owned by just a few companies. I mean, look at the massive holding company, PepsiCo, which owns another massive holding company called Yum, which owns three of its big stores are Kentucky Fried Chicken, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut. There are others too. Those are just the biggies. That's oligopoly. They control the market. And Procter & Gamble is crazy how big it is. Johnson & Johnson is actually family owned. It's a corporation, but a family owns it. And Mondelez and Nestle are combining, and these two are combining too. So there's probably going to be 8 unless the Federal Trade Commission stops it. So the point is, you might think there's choice, there's not. I mean, heck, when you go to grocery stores, I think I've mentioned this before, but Albertsons and Safeway are owned by the same company. And if Kroger's buys them, that means Super Value will be owned by them too. There'll be 3 stores all owned by one. So you think, oh, there's all these stores in variety. They're in competition. They're not in competition. Here's another example of this. Media. About 95% of what we watch or see are by these 6 companies. Actually, it's 5, because 21st Century Fox, which is owned by a company called News Corp, they sold 20th Century Fox to Disney. So Disney is even about a third bigger than this. I just don't have that chart. And I thought I'd put this up here because I just want to show you how much is owned by these media giants. So you go in there and you look on TV, or for that matter, internet or anything, video games, anything media related, and it's owned by just a few companies. Like National Amusements, they have everything from CBS, Paramount, MTV, Nickelodeon, Showtime, the CW network, Spike, all these things. I don't even know what half of them are. But so movies, television, you name it. Disney, you have 20th Century Fox, everything from ABC television to ESPN to all the Marvel to Vice to the SEC network. But it's kind of mind-boggling how you see it looks like choice, but it's really only just a few. And also much of the print media, and much of the print media goes to the internet. Same with Sony. So I just want to give you an example of how that looks like oligopolies. Yeah.
Why do they even bother?
So, think about if you're looking at television, on television, you go to the channels. But there's only one channel. But if you have 20 different channels, that's 20 different things that can watch your media and 20 different revenue streams that you can sell out of it. So just the same thing about General Motors. They don't see this much anymore, but General Motors used when I was a kid, you'd be able to get Chrysler dealership, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, GMC trucks, and they would be different spots. So you had to go to different places to buy. Same thing with food, different items. Let me give you another example. These were all the banks in the 1980s. These 4 banks have 90% of all the finance or the commercial banking. 4 banks. There are local banks here. I mean, they're big. Stockman's banks, for example. It's a big statewide bank, but it's nothing. So this is another example. This is 2020, but this is the percent of the marketplace owned by 2 companies. So 80% hardware stores, now it's 90% actually. like manufacturing on mattresses, 2 companies have over 60% of the market. These are all, what I mean, it's all oligopolies. It's now 40%. 2 movie theaters have 40% of all. And like smartphones, it's now 100%, or 2 companies. They control it all. That's oligopoly. So everything operates very much like a monopoly. So a couple of things that happened out of this era. Look at the relative share of manufacturing. You can see right here, Britain was the leader, 1800. The US catching, but it's pretty spread out. But look, because of economies of scale and concentration. 1900, the US passed. And by 1913, in the eve of World War I, the United States had 1/3 of all manufacturing in the world. I should add, Germany was exploding, especially in high value manufacturing. But then they would have a little war and destroy their competitive advantage. One more thing I'll show you about this. We have incredible income inequalities that are going to come out of this. Here's 1900. Once again, grain of salt because it's hard to figure out wealth, but income you can get a pretty good idea. The top 1% have about 17% of the income. Just the top 1%. And if you have additional income, that allows you to accumulate wealth. Wealth is a guess, but if they approximate about 50% of the wealth in the hands of the top 1% in 1900. But it's a guess. Because you ever pay attention to like real estate, you notice the price is never the same. The price fluctuates, or for that matter, let's say you have a lot of wealth and you buy fine art. What is fine art? Yeah, it depends. I mean, who could put a price on art? So really it fluctuates. Like for example, look at that amazing work of art I have in the back of the classroom. A blue field with a floating blue head. You can't put a price on that.
$3.
You know, I understand that some of us don't have those, but that's Tobias point. So with that, now, so what you have is the wealth is focusing. This became a real crisis. Wait a second. All the wealth is focusing on top. What about everybody else? Might they say, we've had enough? There became a real fear of those on top that there's going to be a revolution. And they talked about it all the time. All the time. Especially going into World War, from about 1880 to World War II. And so here's the percentage of the billionaires. 1900, most were railroads. It makes sense, right? There are a few billionaires. Look at finance. Remember I told you finance, most of the billionaires today, finance. They made it through the buying and selling of stock. I thought I'd show you today. This is 2020, but the top 77% have, it's higher now. Have about 80% of it. Or the top 10%, this has about 71% of the wealth. So wealth is just kind of funneling to the top. So in some ways, we're more unequal than we would have been. In fact, the bottom 40% have negative wealth today. They have more debt than what they actually owe. That's all it is. And so it's always been this way, but you can see what I'm trying to show is you can see in the 1890s and the trend has kind of continued. I thought this was something, I wasn't showing this, but this is the percentage of wealth went to the top 1% during the pandemic. And it's about $27 trillion went to the top 1% in the United States during the pandemic. Wow. That's the, yeah, okay. But, and this is another thing I thought I'd show you for today because I was looking for something else and I saw this. This is 2020. So Montana was about 30th in income inequality, but that is changing fast. This is still the way it is in 2023. We have the fastest growing income inequality in the nation. Lots of reasons, because wages are stagnant for most people, but the biggest is influx of relatively wealthy people from out of state. And not people coming and getting jobs, or people coming and buying real estate. And yeah, and that's only going to accelerate really fast. So that's Montana now. So we see these things now. New York, which kind of surprises me because of well, of course, it's really unequal. If you go to Manhattan, it's kind of amazing. The people you know are worth millions next to people homeless. Okay, so thus we have a new philosophy developing of wealth and inequality. And this is a big error because what you're going to have is people are going to try to justify this. They're going to try to justify this. And I'm not kidding when I talk about revolution. They talk about it all the time. All the time. But also, there was a real desperate effort to control politics because those on top wanted to control their wealth and position, as everybody wants to control this. They have it set up for their children. And they're more and more desperate as they control more. They don't want political power to come in from the bottom and take it. And here's a pretty famous one of showing that there's Vanderbilt, Jay Gould, and sitting on workers. And this was a real fight. What about them? Which is the vast majority of the population. It's a real question that the world has never really dealt with. So one of the big elements that really fits in with the free labor idea, but it's really going to come out, you see in the 1870s, 1880s, the gospel of success. Your worth of a person is money. And it glorified you doing this on your own, the individual, your hard work, your courage, your initiative. So it's really that kind of free labor idea, but your value of a person is your money. How much money? Money is your value. And you see a lot of the philosophers, it's called utilitarianism in Britain. They'll come to the United States talking about that. Your best utility to society is to get rich. Well, Horatio Alger, there are a bunch of ghostwriters who wrote these books under the name Horatio Alger, hundreds of novels. And there were all these rags to riches stories about somebody starting out a little dirt homestead and becoming a rich rancher or becoming like a paper boy. And through their own gumption and hard work, they rose up. I should add, they're always little boys, always a boy, and always on their own. Nobody helped them. And this became this ethic, this ethos of this on your own, the individual, or a term that would become very prominent, still is, but really prominent at the turn of the last century, the self-made man. The self-made man. On their own, they did it. And this really hit this kind of Western ideal, like a cowboy on the plains, doing it all on their own. And to take nothing away from people's hard work, well, nobody is self-made. Everybody in here has had a lot of help to get you where you're at. The good and bad elements, yes. But you've had schools, parents, you name it. Or like anything else. I mean, remember we talked about all the government aid to railroads. They wouldn't have made it without that. Heck, we live in Montana. Can't even imagine the state of Montana happening without the federal government. Clearing, forcing the people who live there off of it. Funding the railroads. The federal government builds all the roads. They're the ones who pay for it. So on. Doesn't mean that people don't work incredibly hard, but the point is life is complex. But who really likes this idea of the self-made man? What kind of people? People who are what? They already have wealth. So that justifies them. They could say, I did it all on my own. You do it. And if you don't, it's your fault. It's not mine. I did it on my own. The important thing here is not individuals and how they did it. The important thing here is how this dictates the rules. The rules. But, sidetrack, how old is the Earth? What a sidetrack, huh? You weren't ready for this, were you? Well, I know what you're thinking. Bishop Usher said in 1404, who was thinking that? Actually, this is really yes. Huh? You're thinking of Bishop Usher? Yeah, what he said. There are a lot. Okay. they went through, and let's say in Christian Europe, they went through biblical studies. Bishop Ussher was considered one of the most prominent one. He said, 4004 BC, it was a Thursday, or November, probably 27th. That's British. So the earth was at that time when he wrote that, about 5,680 years. No one's really sure. There were some Greek philosophers who said it was much older, other religions at different ages. Fitting enough to revolution it. How old's the earth? It might be older. It might be millions of years old, billions of years old. It blew them away. How did they know? Well, they started digging canals all over and finding amazing things, like these weird bones of animals they couldn't find. The same thing, they're mining more than ever before with the Industrial Revolution. This is Britain. It's crisscrossed with canals, and they were finding all kinds of amazing things. Absolutely amazing. And tunneling under granite and finding seashells. What? It blew them away. Or, this is peat. And as they dig through peat to get to coal, every year, last layer of peat, and they're digging through thousands and then millions of layers. That means millions of years. This is something that was just blowing them away in the end of the 1700s into the 1800s. When they started finding all these fossils, that is why Jefferson, remember I told you they thought there might be dinosaurs? That's why the assumption was, well, those animals must be somewhere, right? And why were some animals surviving in some areas, some weren't? Why were there clearly so many different species of insects or I mean, this was just blowing them away. All Industrial Revolution related. You're wondering, what does that do with the gospel of success? Well, first thing I should tell, other things I'll show you is, here's one of the giant sloth fossils. I thought, this is awesome for the New York Times in 1860. Here's Mount Vesuvius. Anyone know where Mount Vesuvius is? Italy, a little bit further. Yeah, it's just south of Naples. And have you ever heard of Pompeii? That's when it erupted. If you get a chance, go there. Pompeii's amazing and hot. And if you like people, you'll like Pompeii. Bombs. But actually, this is 1943 when British American Free French and Canadian forces landed south of Naples. Vesuvius just went off right during World War II. What a good time for a volcanic eruption. But what they found under Vesuvius, which had to be immeasurably old to them in the 1840s, they found fossilized seashells embedded under the volcano. You get the point. Wow. Everything we thought. Who am I leading to? Yes. Darwin was actually in competition with two other authors to come up with their theory, and they weren't alone. This was being discussed for 70 years. But Darwin beat him. He wrote a summary before anyone else could get their work out called An Origin of Species, and that's why we know Darwin. That's what Darwin looked like at this time. And on the origin of species, he avoided humans. He avoided them, but because he knew how controversial this would be, and it was widely accepted for various things. But what he talked about was he did not invent this, but it's natural selection. And natural selection is some species can better adapt to the environment than other species, and that's why some species who might seem weaker, smaller, in a fight they would not survive, but they survive because they could adapt. So it's not strength, it's the ability to adapt. Yes, it could be intelligence, but there's a lot of it. So.
There was another author who claimed that humans are like an opposite of fields and great form and gravity were the workers rates of every animal.
I've seen people say that. You know.
And the author's name was Mark Twain.
Yeah, I know Mark Twain would say that. And Mark Twain also, because Mark Twain was what we call a very good cynic. So, And the thing about it is, it's eventually, that's what he looked like being wrote in 1871. He would actually write The Descent of Man. And then he actually used a term that was already being used. This goes back to the Greek philosophers, but natural selection is evolution. And he actually didn't like that term, but he started using it where he actually talked about men. And that's when you see Darwin, that's usually the picture you see, something like that. That's after that. But that's what he looked like when he actually published it. And the basic idea is you have all kinds of animals who would adapt to changing conditions. Some would go extinct, they could not survive. Other changes, mutations, whatever. But it's the big important thing about Darwin is, and I have to say this because it's very important to talk about philosophy of wealth. It's not that animals are like changing slowly to surely to become humans. It's that these are kind of like the family tree of primates. And everything, humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, all the way to bush babies, etc., have common ancestry. And for natural selection, they broke off into different species. Some failed, some made it, some didn't. It's not that chimpanzees or gorillas are slowly evolving into humans. No. The only natural selection is gorillas might be slowly naturally selecting into a slightly different type of a gorilla. I should also add that humans are incredibly violent and brutal. And so they killed off all their competitors. That's why there's no Neanderthals running around. Which, darn it, I'm kind of sad. But that's Darwin. What does this have to do with anything? Well, once people started getting to Darwin, it's like, oh, this proves what we always knew. There's a hierarchy of species. And what you have all these animals, you have a ranking of species from like, amoeba all the way up to humans. And amoeba are slowly but surely evolving all the way to human beings. So someday that plucky amoeba, if it works hard and shows courage and charisma, unlike charisma, they too can become a human. And that's why here it's showing Darwin as implying to people who do not understand it, that chimpanzees are evolving into humans, which is not at all what Darwin said. And so with that, yes, thank you, Jean. He was really mad about this. Well, there was a book from the 1960s called The March of Progress. And in it, they laid out this picture. And this was just supposed to be the different families of primates. But doesn't it kind of look like evolved, like steppings up to human? Have all of you seen this? Everyone's seen, and there's all kinds of stupid little jokes about it. I'll show you a couple. But this implying that you have this hierarchy, therefore, of primates. Here's the dumb chimpanzee, and someday they'll become a human. Which that's not the way it happened. And that's actually accidental. They were not meaning this to happen in the book March of Progress, but it did happen. And so once you have that idea, if you have a hierarchy of species, can't you have a hierarchy of humans? Doesn't this sound familiar already? Doesn't this nicely pigeonhole into something we've already talked about? So, can't you have a hierarchy then of different types of men? Of mankind, of humankind, and so therefore some that are closer to this ideal and some are closer to this ideal. Can't you have that? And once you decide that, well, if there's different levels of humans, couldn't that be rich and poor, men and women, color of skin? Almost immediately. They're already kind of doing this, but now they could say we have a scientific background. It's science. Well, it sounds like science, doesn't it? This is science. Why are some people on top? They must have superior traits. They work harder. They're smarter. Different color skin. Male. You get how I connected that? Does anybody know what we're getting to? Yes. Who? Darwin. Darwin hated with a passion.
No, actually, not excited about it. Hate some of our things. But interesting to learn history. It is literally just like a slightly more tolerant. No, it's like.
Yeah, anytime you want.
Okay. I'm gonna.
It's like any other job. Most of it's good.
Yes, you stop at.
Let's see it. But it's like that radio job.
Yeah.
See it, see it.
Have to start with Vegas.
Social Darwin, what's that?
We have to start, we have to start with Vegas. I read the Origin Species, it was long, and it was. We have
It's a hard book to read, the style.
Yeah, that style of writing is a little meh now, but.
It's pretty interesting. I talked about the first book, we did Karl Marx. And Karl Marx is easy to read, yes. High five. There we go. Oh, with the explosion.
I had to like look up so many definitions.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a hard read and the style. That's who you read it. I read it a long time ago. Yeah,
Fair question.
the answer's 7.
7?
See? Right, what's the answer? There we go.
People's wrote it. I don't know. I just like went around and I was like, huh.
No, it was, yeah. Saying. It was, sorry, the number of the street. Oh, no.
What? I heard somewhere. Okay, that was oh, no. This should be a podcast. Rocks are down. What? Yeah, to say. Almost all the vision. Yes. Yeah.
You bet, no problem. Hey, how we doing in here? We're filming this. Want to see something cool? That's it? That's it? Did not bounce at all. No formal training. Make it so much easier now. They